biblical Paul, but is some apostle today that's calling themselves an apostle, or someone prophesied over them that they would do apostle work. There seems to be this idea or this need for title to validate or give credibility to what we're doing. You know, the apostle is a term that refers to an individual sent by God or the church on a specific spiritual mission, such as a church planter. And primarily that's what it was, like Barnabas and Timothy. So you had the apostles that walked with Jesus that were planting this movement, all 12 of them kind of, which is 12 is the number of government. And they're kind of planting the movement we call the church. But what's interesting is many of the people that are being called apostles don't operate in the office of the apostle. They that, like, pastor isn't good enough. So I don't want to be pastor anymore. I want to be promoted to apostle, which can refer to people many times as someone who is like now of greater authority and oversees all of these churches. The question I have is, how many of those have you planted? Yeah. You know, the idea of apostle was a church planter. He's someone who goes out and goes to places where there is no church, and they plant churches. And usually the people who are doing the work of an apostle don't have a need to be called an apostle. Like, we've turned this idea of apostle, as it was used in the Bible as a title, we've wanted to claim that title rather than really operate in the office of the apostle. And Paul is just simply saying here, you know, it's obvious that I am an apostle. He saw the Lord. He was not referring to, not only was he operating in the office of the apostle, but he was also an apostle because he saw Christ and it was flowing from him. It goes on verse 2. If to others I am not an apostle, at least I am to you, for you were the seal of my apostleship in the Lord. Right there just really demonstrates that if you're an apostle, you're planting churches, and that these people came to Christ because he was an apostle to them and told them the message of Christ as a witness of what Christ had spoken. Yeah. Then it goes on in verse 3, this is my defense to those who would examine me. Okay, so automatically he's now on defense. He establishes first his identity, and now you know, he's going to give them an idea. I just messed something up here. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's interesting coming to his defense. There was a lot of people who challenged his validity and credibility back in the day. As today, it's interesting that there's not much that's changed in the first century versus today, and people wanting to undermine his.
Why do you think that is? I mean, here's
authority.
a guy that planted many churches. The 12 disciples had a little reluctance to side with Paul. I mean, when Paul goes to these places and he says that, Peter, you went and hung out with all the other guys, you know, when you were with us, you acted like, oh, that's great, you're with us. But when you came home to Jerusalem, you went and hung out with all your cronies, and you kind of avoided us. You know, Paul was all for, or Peter was all for Paul when they were out in the Wild West, and then they come back, and then there's this pulling away, almost to shy away from Paul. You wonder why that is, why there were so many people, even in Jerusalem, that shied away. Could it have been because of the persecution he had brought before he was a believer, and now there's a distaste for him? Or could it be the brash form of approach that Paul took when taking the gospel places? Yeah. But in verse 3, he says, this is my defense to those who examine him. So he's got people who are examining him. He says, do we not have the right to eat and drink? Are we not free? And the answer, of course, is yes. And he goes, do we not have the right to take along a believing wife, as do the other apostles and the brothers of the Lord? And
Peter, Cephas.
Cephas. Do we not have so Cephas is married. The other apostles were married. Paul was not married. And apparently they were making some big deal about it. Or is it only Barnabas and I who have no right to refrain from working for a living? Ooh, okay, now let's back up here. It's an interesting thing. This is where there are many people that say there shouldn't be people that work in ministry for a living. And this is really where Paul is addressing that. He's saying, do we have no right to work for a living?
Yeah.
Now, in Paul's and Barnabas' case, they go out and they do tent making, and then they do that. And they didn't ask of anybody for money. They didn't want they didn't want money or the idea in the minds of the people they were reaching that the reason they came to give this gospel was out of money or that they had made it up to get money. So anybody who says, well, Paul spread this thing because he was trying to get money from people, like they were trying to fleece people. That's all the church wants to do. Paul went to these places doing work so that they would never be able to accuse him of that. And he's saying, listen, go ahead, examine my life right now. We're out working for a living. He says, I don't believe it's wrong that you're working in ministry to do it. He says, but Barnabas and I haven't done it. We would work so that nothing would hinder the purity of the gospel to a pagan people, that everything they did was about money. All of the paganism would come back to money, and they didn't want that to be attached to the gospel.
And he saw it as a privilege to be able, that's something that he could boast in, that I am doing this not for any other means. It's something that God has charged me to do. How can I take anything from it? It was something that he held in high honor, which is interesting.
Well, and his point in all of it is that he's not been demanding his rights as an apostle.
Yeah, even though he could.
Yeah,
if he
he's
to.
Like, the other apostles had been doing it. They had done that.
There's nothing wrong with it.
They had received financial support from those they served, and they even brought their wives along on the ministry travels. But Paul is implying that he and Barnabas also have the right to ask for this support rather than working an outside job to support their own ministry efforts. That they do, but they had a right to ask. They haven't taken that right, but they have a right to do that. And it's interesting, too, because in ministry, those who do it vocationally, there's a belief with so many people that what pastors do or what ministers do or evangelists or people who work in ministry, that they should not be paid like anyone else in the world.
Yeah.
Like that it's almost as though they should be paid less because it's not as worthy of everything else. And I think
and Paul addresses that too.
Yeah,
in
that's
another letter. Is it in Corinthians or in Galatians where he's like, is it too much to ask if we've sown spiritual things among you that we not reap physical things? That we're investing in you, but it's not tangibly as you can see it, and we're deserved our due.
Yeah, but it's interesting. We're very concerned about taking care of those people that care for our physical flesh. And provide for that, and those who provide for our soul. But the spiritual part of our life, that's not as important. And I would argue it's the most important thing.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to get a raise at all. That's not why I'm sitting here talking. I'm just saying we need to have a different attitude about people who are doing ministry. It's a very important thing in our life. We need people who are giving their lives to minister to the spiritual nature of people. Goes on, let's go on to 7. Who serves as a soldier at his own expense?
Yeah,
who
that's
plants a vineyard without eating any of his fruit? Or who tends a flock without getting some of the milk? What Paul's saying is he's now connecting the work we do in ministry is as important and essential as everything else that everyone else is doing.
Yeah.
He's saying, so what you're saying is it makes sense to you that you're doing all of these tasks and you get something in return from it, but it doesn't make sense to you that if we do a spiritual thing, you shouldn't get anything. It should be free.
Yeah. It's goofy thinking for sure. Yeah, what soldier is doing it for their own? You know, they got to pay out of their own pocket. No, the one who they serve, they get compensated by.
Right. Go on to verse 8. Do I say these things on human authority? Does not the law say the same thing? And it does. The law identifies the need to take care of those who serve in the temple and to serve the body. And for it is written in the law of Moses, you shall not muzzle an ox when it treads out the grain. Is it for oxen that God is concerned?
Yeah.
He's like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
He's not concerned about the oxen. He's referring to people who are doing ministry that you're not supposed to muzzle the ox. Goes on in verse 10, does he not certainly speak for our sake? It was written for our sake, because the plowman should plow in hope and the thresher thresh in hope of sharing in the crop. Like, he's not suggesting that they should be paid unfairly in one direction or the other.
Yeah.
But that they should be cared for, that they should be able to live on this planet without struggling.
Yeah.
To do those things and to provide for their families and to be able to do what they need to do. And it's an issue a lot of people don't talk about. Why do you think that is?
It makes people uncomfortable. I had a conversation the other day. Someone was surprised. They're like, "Wait, you get paid?" And I'm like, "Yeah. How do you think I survive? Like, where do you think this came from?" You know, it's interesting, and they weren't like offended or weirded out, but you could tell they were a little like taken back, like, oh, like I didn't know, like, you know, pastors were paid. And I think we were talking about this the other day, how it's like a northern thing where that's the struggle for people as far as like paying ministers. A southern thing, they want to lavish and take care of their pastors, but in the north, it's a little bit different in perception of how the church operates and works. I don't know where it comes from, but I know people have a hard time with it.
I think in some cases, and Paul may be referring to this, they don't know what a pastor does or a minister of the God. They don't know. So they don't believe. You don't work as hard as I do. So why would we pay you?
Yeah.
Or why should you get paid a lot? You know, you don't. What you do isn't as stressful as what we do. And isn't that more of a human nature? I think so many people think that way. Like, they think what they do is the hardest thing there is. And everybody else, it's easy.
Yeah.
And
are jobs paid by stress or by value that the person adds?
Usually jobs are paid by what money you bring in.
Yeah, that too. But the value of, not saying that there is, but I'm making a point as far as spiritually, like what Paul says. What we've sown spiritually,
right?
Is that not more precious than?
Well, and we haven't gotten to that verse. You got ahead of us.
Is this in this chapter?
Yes.
I always do that.
Yes.
I always think I read that somewhere else.
So does he not certainly speak for our sake? It was written but for our sake, because the plowman should plow in hope and the thresher thresh in hope, sharing in the crop. Like, that just makes sense. That should make sense to all of us. And it goes on to verse 11. If we have sown spiritual things among you, is it too much if we reap material things from you? So it's like a bartering thing. And that's how they would do it. They would barter anyway before there ever was money. There were people who helped with spiritual things, and that's why it was God's economy. It's the whole tithe thing. And we can talk about tithing. People struggle and say, well, it's not, I'm under grace, so I don't need to tithe. Well, that, first of all, is just messed up in so many different ways. That takes on this idea that because I have God's favor, that I no longer need to be obedient to the principle God created for the economy of the kingdom of God is crazy. Yes, grace is unmerited favor that God gives you. That's what grace means, unmerited favor. But it isn't unmerited permission to disobey.
Yeah.
Like, to not follow God's direction. it's not a matter of going to heaven or hell. It's learning how to live in the kingdom of God. You don't, I'm under grace so I can kill somebody, or I'm under grace so that I can serve other gods, or I'm under grace. Like the thinking that says, I don't need to tithe, you have to then take that thinking to all of the commandments in the Bible. Yeah. Every one of them. You can't pick and choose what commandments you think are and are not important for our life. And when we want to believe a lie, it's not hard to find evidence to believe a lie. It's not hard to find evidence to support what I want to believe, whether it's a lie or not.
Yeah.
What tithe is, and in Hebrews it says when you put it in the box, it's as though God takes it out of the box, that he reaches in and it becomes a spiritual thing. So I just say to people, try it. Try it and see what God does when you try it.
Yeah.
And if you're a person that says, no, it all belongs to me, I'm the one that did it all, I'm the one who does everything, just say this: Lord, only allow me to keep what I have worked, what I have earned, what's mine, what I did. You won't pray that prayer because you know everything you have was given to you by God. It's a dangerous prayer to pray. So encourage people. If you have a problem with it, test it. In fact, the Bible says test it out. Test tithing out and see what happens when you do that. It's crazy what happens in your finances when you open the door to it. It goes on in verse 12. If others share this rightful claim on you, do not we even more? Nevertheless, we have not made use of this right, because we worked.
Yeah.
But we endure anything rather than put an obstacle in the way of the gospel of Christ. And this is what I was saying earlier. What Paul was saying is we didn't want any obstacle to get in the way. And if money was going to become an obstacle, we just removed it out of the way.
Yeah.
We just took it out of the way and said, that's not why we're here. That's not our motivation. We were planting a church in a city, and I won't name the city, but I'm sitting in we were meeting in a church that was dying, and the board of that church, one of the board members, they have a lot of money in their bank account. And the board member had said to me, he goes, we're not giving you that money. And I'm like, really? I mean, the church that's down there, we planted this church, right? And I'm like, really? I said, he goes, no, we're gonna do something in community with it. I'm like, did you ask God about that? Well, no, this is what we're gonna do. He acted like it was his money.
Yeah, to dangle it in front of.
Yeah, he's like, but we're not giving you the money. I'm like, but we're gonna give you an opportunity for your church to go on. We're gonna pastor you. We're gonna do all of those things, and that's what they wanted. They wanted all of it. But they didn't want to give the money to this church plant. He says, you think you big churches come down here and you're going to take over? And I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. He thought the only reason we went into that city was to get their money.
Yeah.
Oy.
Yeah.
There is this basic assumption because of a few situations or scenarios where people just assume that's what the church is all about. They just want your money. Guard your money.
Yeah, watch out for these lies. There,
and I'm like, do you realize how much money we put into this church plant? We didn't come down here to get your money. We didn't even know you had the money.
Yeah.
We came down here and planted a church because this city needed a life-giving church. I did go off on them.
Yeah.
I said, first of all, it's not yours. Secondly, what you're doing is complete disobedience, and you will stand before God, and you have to give an account for that. And the reality is, we're investing in cities, and it takes money to do that.
Yeah.
And I think when you have a heart to take the gospel to the world, you cannot have more of a heart for your money than you do have for the mission. And that's where so many people are at. And Paul's like, he didn't have a heart for money. He had a heart for the mission. And if it was going to get in the way, I'm going to take it and move it out of the way.
Yeah.
Goes on to verse 13. Do you not know that those who are employed in the temple service get their food from the temple, and those who serve at the altar share in the sacrificial offerings? It's just the economy of the kingdom of God.
That was the Levitical system they had set up, was to make sure that the Levites were taken care of. They had a plot. Their inheritance was of the Lord. Their share was in the sacrificial system. God took care of them, and it was provided by the rest of the clans that had a portion. They had an inheritance that they were given, and God had instituted, but take care of my people that are doing the ministry on your behalf.
That's
this has
right.
been instituted from the jump.
Yeah, people that God has called to pastor other people, and that's what they do. They're there. They run into the fires with them. They run into counsel. If their marriage is struggling, they're there for them. And then what we do is we make sure they're taken care of. That's the responsibility of the people who are part of a church.
Which is funny because I've heard people say that's a stretch to make, that the Levitical system doesn't apply to us today as far as the order and structure of how God has instituted it for modern day pastors. And it's always funny, these type of verses, when you have an apostle that's making a callback to the Levitical priesthood and system and how God had set it up, it validates that that is still in operation today. It might not look the same, but the heart of what took place back then is still functional.
It's the same. It was used even when the temple was no longer. It was unrealistic to think that over time the temple was going to be the place to worship God only. Synagogues were created in other cities to worship God because it wasn't practical to go to the temple every Friday night and Saturday. So there were synagogues where they would go to worship, and they would bring their resource to the synagogues. And Paul, even after they become believer, would bring money back to the people in Jerusalem. There was this sense that it was Levitical, and this verse really identifies that didn't die away.
No.
When Jesus came.
Yeah, the heart of what God had done in the past is still in operation today, which I think that people don't understand, like the idea that, we're under grace. So all that's done, there's a new, God changed his mind, New Covenant 2, part 2, we're figuring this out, as if like the old one failed not because of God, it failed because of our ability to keep it. And I don't think people like understand the difference between old and new covenant.
So to God, he gives us this map of what is broken and how we can respond in a way that's healthy and strong. But they struggle to be able to do that. So Jesus comes to empower them to live it out.
Yeah.
To behave as Christ. And yet we're not. But that I'm under grace, so I don't need to be like Christ.
Yeah. He picked up his cross, so I don't have to. It's like, no, he invites you to it. It empowers you to do it.
It's a diluted way of seeing the new covenant. In verse 14, he says, in the same way, the Lord commanded that those who proclaim the gospel should get their living by the gospel. I mean, I don't know how much clearer Paul needs to be. I think Paul, listening to some people, would say, I tried really hard to be clear. Apparently, I failed.
Did I show you there's a guy out there. If you follow him, please unfollow him. And I don't say that lightly. We don't do that here. But he does a lot of inflammatory content just to get clicks. And he posts stuff that'll get a lot of attention and make people mad. And one of them, he was talking about like the tithe, of how pastors shouldn't be paid. And he's like, show me a verse in the Bible where pastors should be paid. And it's this goofy music in the background. And he's like making faces and trying to like find in the Bible. And so I put in the comments, and I'm like, prove to me that this isn't just clickbait or rage bait. And do me a favor, if you believe pastors shouldn't get paid for their work in ministry, you might not be a pastor, but you are getting paid off of your ministry, Macmillan Ministries. Because I went to your link tree, and there's a donation page and where people can monthly support you. So if you really are about that action, take that off of your page. Otherwise, you're a hypocrite. Because you make these statements to get clicks, but it's not even what you believe. You're doing it to undermine the authority of the bride.
And what did he respond with?
He never responded.
Of course he didn't,
No,
because there's not a response.
No, yeah. It's just people want the...
Why is it that we're all arguing about our opinions, but nobody's actually posting scripture that defends what they're saying?
Exactly.
It goes on, let's go on to 15. But I have made no use of any of these rights, nor am I writing these things to secure any such provision, for I would rather die than anyone deprive me of my ground for boasting.
Yeah.
I mean, Paul is pretty confident. My wife, in another book he writes, my wife says, Paul's kind of arrogant. I said, no, honey, he's just talking and writing with confidence in who he is. He says, listen, I'm not even writing this to get something out of it. I'm writing this because he knows he's an apostle. And he's like, this is the way the church should see how we take care of those who are doing ministry. That if they are like the ox, why do you muzzle the ox? If they're doing a good job, you should bless them and take care of them and meet the needs that they have.
There is something just came to my mind when he is talking about how he's boasting, but he's doing it as a privilege in order to witness. So he doesn't take money in order to, I can imagine, raise eyebrows. Like, why would you do that? Well, let me tell you why. This is what happened. I kind of did something like that, not with the money thing, but I left basketball in order to go into ministry. And I had friends telling me, all these words, like, you're not smart. Like, that was really dumb. You still can play. Why are you going into ministry? You got your whole life to do that. And it was an opportunity, and it was always a bridge. When people would ask me if I was at the gym, I'd play basketball. People, they're like, where do you play? What do you do? I'm like, oh, actually, here's my story. And it was something, not that I boast in myself, but it bridged the gap to be able to tell you why I did something seemingly so ridiculous to the world, is because this is what God did in my life. And I can imagine Paul doing the same thing. I'm entitled to this. I could do this if I wanted to. I'm not saying you should, but this is the reason. This is what happened to me. And I boast in that privilege to say that I'm commissioned by Christ. And here's what you need to know.
And you gave him the card that said All-American of the Pee Wee League?
Yeah.
Is that what you did?
The virtual league. The virtual league. NBA 2K champion. Yeah.
Well, it goes on to verse 16. You know, it's interesting. One of the things that Sunday that the Lord kind of gave me was, it's amazing how when we God gives us a command or something that we're to do, you'll hear speakers say this. You'll hear people make this statement. I had to make the sacrifice, all the sacrifices in this world in order to do what God was telling me to do. I had to leave everything behind to go do what God was telling me to do. And that statement reveals in us that we actually think the stuff in this world
was a loss.
Is much better, and to leave it in order to do what God was hard, because it wasn't as good. It wasn't as important. It wasn't as special or desiring as it was if I had just lived in the world. It is a broken way of thinking. If you're listening to this, listen, there is no sacrifice on this earth that compares to the blessing of what we'll find with God. It's what you as a believer, what we should be saying is, why are all these people sacrificing these eternal things for a world that's passing away? Why are they sacrificing their life on all the stuff and pleasure and everything the unbelievers giving their life to? Why are they doing that when they could have all of this? And that's what God's calling us to, is something greater. It's not sacrifice. We leave behind and we step into the truth of what's ahead. And Paul's saying this isn't sacrifice.
No.
So in verse 16 it says, for if I preach the gospel, that gives me no grounds for boasting, for necessity is laid upon me. Woe to me if I do not preach the gospel. Like he has to preach the gospel. This is what he's called to do. He doesn't have a choice. And God's saying, I'll take care of you. And he does that through us. For if I do this of my own will, I have a reward. But if not of my own will, I am still entrusted with a stewardship. I'm responsible. I have to do it. I have I have a responsibility to do this and to steward the message that God's called me to. The burden and ability to preach the gospel were both given to Paul by God. He's not preaching as a volunteer, but under orders as a willing and engaged bondservant. As such, Paul states he has no reward for merely doing what he must do. Instead, he views himself as a steward entrusted with a task from God. He is honored to be entrusted with this task of carrying the message of the gospel to so many people, but he recognizes he simply is following orders. And he's glad to play his part, but God then takes care of him.
Mm-hmm.
That's the difference between those who volunteer, are doing, God hasn't called them to do vocational ministry. They're still supposed to share the gospel, but they don't do it on a level that a vocational minister will go to a place, and in Paul's case, an apostle, go and plant churches.
Just to address this question real quick, won't take too long. Adam says, question, when Paul writes this, how many of the other apostles are still alive, and why did or didn't they follow what he said? They did follow what he said. They approved of him and accepted him as a brother. And 1 Corinthians was written in about 55 AD, so I don't think any apostle had passed by that point. This is still pretty early.
What's the question again?
He says that when Paul writes this, how many of the other apostles are still alive, which I would say all of them. I'd have to look into that, but
Well,
all
some of them
it's only
might have
50
been.
AD.
There may have been, it's possible, yeah, I don't know the detail, but I'm sure many of them were, or some of them were martyred by that point.
By 58, yeah.
You know, all of the disciples of Jesus were martyred with the exception of John, which is interesting because all of them left Jesus with the exception of John. John was the only one that they tried to martyr, and he wouldn't burn up in the oil, or he wouldn't die in the oil. It's an interesting fact. Okay, let's go on to verse 17. For if I do this, we already did that. Yeah. Verse 18, what then is my reward? That in my preaching I may present the gospel free of charge, so as not to make full use of my right in the gospel. It's not like we're charging people to hear the gospel. He's saying that's not what I'm doing. You're being obedient to a command, you're not paying a bill when you do that. And that's why a lot of people say, well, I'm not paying. What is it worth to me? You get the wrong mentality.
Yeah.
It's not paying a bill. I'm just being obedient to something that actually, when I bring the tithe to God, it actually is ministering to me more than I realize. Like when I bring the tithe, that act of obedience is ministering to me in my life, and that's what you're getting something from it. It's not to pay the bill of the ministry that's going on in the church, and you certainly could look at it in a secular way, but that would even be the wrong way of looking at it.
Yeah.
Goes on to verse 19. It says, for though I am free from all, I have made myself a servant to all, that I might win more of them.
That's way different than how people view freedom.
Yeah. Well, first of all, there's plenty of ministers out there that believe people are there to serve them. And as pastors, we're called to serve people as Christ served the church, that we are to serve the bride of Christ as Christ loves the bride of Christ. But this also highlights some other things. It says, I have made myself a servant to all. And I think a lot of Christians sometimes think that they're too important to serve. Like either I have too much wisdom, or to serve in the nursery, or to serve the church in a way that isn't honoring of me or doesn't lift me up is somehow I was disrespected. When in reality, the Bible says to the one who serves all, who isn't recognized, is held with the highest esteem in heaven. Paul is like, my mindset is I'm a servant to all. No matter where I go, no matter what I'm doing, if someone needs prayer, I'm a servant to that person. If I go into my workplace and there's someone going through a marriage problem and God gives me a word, I'm a servant to that person because I serve Christ. Therefore, I serve the object of his love, and whatever situation and whatever time period, whenever it is, I'm a servant to all, that I might win more. This is why it's so important not to hate people. It's hard to serve people you hate. So when you burn bridges with people because you don't like someone's politics or you don't like their opinions, or you aren't going to win a Muslim to the Lord if you hate Muslims. You have to love people. If you're going to win people to Christ, it starts with loving them. And that's how you bring them to Jesus. And that is the gospel. You aren't going to argue them in. You're not going to like manipulate them in. The only way you're going to bring them to the gospel in the first place, beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news. Love. It starts with love. Love goes the whole time you're serving them, and then it ends with love. It's just an incredibly important thing to remember. He says, to the Jews, I became as a Jew in order to win Jews. To those under the law, I became as one under the law, though not being myself under the law. Then I love how he said that. I just want to be clear. I'm not under the law, that I might win those under the law. That there I became what I needed to be in order to reach them, to bring them from where they were at, to show them the way.
And that's the example that Christ set for us, that he was free, he was God, but he did not account that as something to be grasped. In order, he became a servant in order to serve us. So Paul is not inventing something new. He's just following the example of his God who did the same thing for him.
Yeah. It goes on verse 21, to those outside the law, I became as one outside the law, not being outside of the law of God, but under the law of Christ. Okay, this introduces something, a revelation of something that maybe you've not seen before. And many people are aware of this, although you don't hear it talked about. It says, not being outside the law of God, but under the law of Christ, that I might win those outside the law. He immediately says, it's not like I ignore the law of God, but I'm under the law of Christ, who is God, right? But he's referring to how Christ has fulfilled the sting of the law. If you didn't fulfill it, you were going to hell, or you needed to make sacrifices. He's talking about the law of Christ that fulfilled. Jesus said it this way. He said, I didn't come to abolish the law, but to fulfill the law. Yeah. A lot of people just ignore that verse. Like they just ignore that it's in the Bible at all. Jesus is saying, I didn't come to do away with it. The law identifies what is right and wrong. It identifies what I declare is right and wrong, what is right and evil, good and evil, the difference between the two. Neither can set you free. But he says the law of Christ is he went and set us free from the law of good and evil, but he also enables us to do good in everything. To overcome the flesh, we walk in the Spirit. So it goes on, verse 22, running out of time here. To the weak, I became weak, that I might win the weak. And I become all things to all people, that by all means I might save some. His full purpose is, how do I reach people? A lot of Christians don't like this way of witnessing or evangelism. They do not, like they immediately go after anybody. They're sellouts, they're wishy-washy, they become all things to all people. They don't dishonor or offend people in order to create a relationship with them so that they can bring them the gospel. There's so many people who don't fully understand this scripture in their day-to-day life. And when they see Christians who are trying to lead people to Jesus, like, becoming like that, not to become like it. Paul, in fact, he even says, I'm not under the law, but I went under the law just to bring them. He's trying to reach people. We're just like, no. We're not going to reach them. If they want to get reached, they got to come over the bridge to us. We're not going to go and get them and bring them over. But isn't that kind of what Jesus did? Didn't Jesus become all things to people in order to save them? He became a Jew. God became a Jew.
Bless you.
And came under the law in order to save those under the law.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm sure that angels weren't having, Jesus turncoat. Can you believe what God just did? Can you believe that?
Well, that's what it literally says, and we just read in Hebrews, Hebrews 2:14. It's not the angel he helps; he comes to help man, the children of Abraham. So he had to become in their likeness, partook of the flesh, shared in their weaknesses, in order to destroy what they feared, which is death, and the devil who had the power of death. God had showed me. My biggest, when you talk about your greatest weaknesses or your greatest strengths, there's like
they're the same.
Aliens. Yeah. I had recognized that my biggest weakness throughout high school and through my life was people pleasing. And like, I was in every friend group. Like I got along with everybody, but, it ended up being being the goofball, participating or not wanting to be rejected, wanting to be accepted by everybody, that I compromised morals. That was always my biggest struggle and where I sinned. But now on the other side, as ministering to people, like I realize that's a strength where I can relate to people and I can see things from their perspective and I can find common ground in order to communicate the gospel. I think a lot of times when we see this, there have been people who have taken this verse, and that means I gotta smoke a cigar, or I gotta drink, and I gotta in order to reach them. It's like that's not what that means.
That's not what Paul did either.
No.
It goes in verse 23. You don't need to lie or cheat or gamble and do all that stuff. Destructive behavior. You show them where they're at, how they can live a life that's free of the brokenness that surrounds their life.
And I think it's the lazy approach with the blowhorn that people just want to yell at people rather than meet them where they're at. And what are you seeing? Like, how do I step into your shoes in order that I can communicate in a way that makes sense to you? It's just, that takes a little longer. So I think people don't like that.
Yeah, I do it. He goes on in verse 23, I do it all for the sake of the gospel, that I may share with them in its blessing. Mm-hmm. He's like, there's a blessing when they come to know me. That's why I do it. I don't enjoy it. I'm just not like I want to go, but there's a blessing in it. Do you not know that in a race, all the runners run, but only one receives the prize? He's like, duh. He uses this. You have to run. Paul launches into a new metaphor in the verse, but his theme is still willingness to set aside personal rights and freedoms for the good of others. Mm-hmm. Just too many people don't want to do that, because this walking with Christ is for them to have rights and freedoms, and it's all about that, rights and freedoms. And what if you have to set those aside in order to reach people? This whole Christian existence from womb to tomb is about people coming to the knowledge of who Christ is.
Like the Moldovians who sold themselves into slavery.
Don't get too into that yet, because I'm going to probably tell that story maybe. Do you not know that in a race, all the runners run, but only one receives the prize? So run that you may obtain it. That we obtain the prize, that we want to win. Every athlete exercises self-control in all things. They do it to receive a perishable wreath, but we are imperishable people. Like, this is not something that will pass away. This is something that will last forever. And we need to operate in those areas. It goes on to verse 26. So I do not run aimlessly. I do not box as one beating the air. A lot of people call it shadow boxing. You're beating the air like you're going after an enemy, and there's no enemy. Mm-hmm. You're wasting your energy beating at something that isn't there. Yeah. And we're not running aimlessly. There's a lot of Christians that seem to be running aimlessly. They don't know what they're running for, or they don't know the value for why they're running. They're just running through life, and they just don't know. And when you have people who might say, well, I don't like it when people tell me what they believe, so I don't want to be the person that tells them what they believe they should believe. What you're doing is you're basically signing off on their death sentence. Mm-hmm. You're basically saying, this is what you're saying, go to hell.
Mm-hmm.
When you think with that logic, what you're saying is go to hell. And God has put you in that place to show them that they can go to heaven to be with him. If you don't share it, who's going to share it with them? Who's going to tell them about Jesus? It's an absurd way of thinking. So don't run aimlessly. And then finally in verse 27, it says, but I discipline my body, keep it under control, lest after preaching to others, I myself should be disqualified. After all this work, I don't in the end want to be disqualified. So while Paul is saying, while I'm doing all this ministry and touching people's lives, I also have to keep myself connected to the vine in order to stay in the same flow that I'm trying to bring people into. And there have been people who lived their whole life for the ministry and then in the end walked away.
And did you see the Greek right there? It says, I pummel my body and make it a slave.
And make
graphic.
it a slave.
I pummel my body and make it a slave.
It makes you wonder, when Paul wrote this, it makes you wonder what he's going through and what they're facing. Like, when a letter is written back to him and he's responding to it, when he's reading this, it makes you wonder, like when in his language and how he says, what he's referring to.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think if Paul were sitting here right now and Paul just gave a monologue
mm-hmm.
of what he just said, I think there have been a number of times where I would have stopped and say, Paul, where's that coming from?
Yeah.
Like, where are you getting that from? And this is a perfect one, but I discipline my body and keep it under control, lest after preaching to others, I myself should be Whoa, Paul. You're Paul. You planted churches all over the known world,
mm-hmm.
and you're worried about being disqualified?
Hmm.
And the reason you're worried is because of something tied to discipline with your body.
Hmm.
What's going on? Like, what are you getting at? No matter how spiritual you think you are, no matter how deep of a well that your wisdom goes or has, no matter what you've done in the kingdom of God, never lose sight of the fact that you could get disqualified. And I think a lot of people think, no.
Mm-hmm.
You can't ever walk away. Once you've had that experience, you can't ever walk away. There are people who walk away in the same door, and I've always said this. People say, do you believe in once saved, always saved? And I'm like, no. But I do believe that it is a lot harder to lose your salvation and a lot harder to be saved.
Yeah.
I used to believe it was easy to get saved and easy to lose it.
Mm-hmm.
Not anymore. I believe that if you believe in your heart and confess with your tongue, your mouth, you shall be saved. But if you stop, if you walk away from that confession and believing in God and what he did, you're not saved because one moment you did.
Yeah.
It all comes down to what you believe.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it'd been interesting to just hear what Paul would say in this as where is he getting it from? Why does his thought go this direction? It's obviously under the unction of the Holy Spirit, but there's a personal aspect to this that's taking what God's giving him, putting it on paper through a lens that he's seeing the world through at that moment.
Mm-hmm.
So 1 Corinthians chapter 9 is in the books. We hope that you enjoyed this time at 2 o'clock on Tuesdays. Please let us know that you enjoyed it. Invite others to come and join us as well. We will also on Thursday be doing Experience the Truth podcast. If you haven't heard of that, just put in Experience the Truth in your browser and it will come up. It's got a face of Jesus and some color on the back. And join us in our podcast. I think you'll enjoy it as well. God bless you and have a great Tuesday evening.